Today's episode of Voiced is from r/confessions and is about a teenager who kept a devastating secret about their family pet. What would you have done? Subscribe if you enjoy. When I was 16, I took my family pet to the vet, found out he was terminally ill, and never told anyone. I'm the eldest of 4 kids in a family of 6, and growing up we had a beautiful albino chinchilla named Dusty. Dusty was an awesome little pet to have as a kid. Very sweet, never bit anyone, loved to cuddle and run around digging tunnels in the bed sheets. He had this really big cage in our guest bedroom that was connected to my room, and every time someone would walk past his cage, he would run to the gate hoping to be taken out. If you opened the gate, he would just hop right into your hand. Anyway, great pet. So about 3 days after I got my driver's license as a 16-year-old, I noticed that one of Dusty's eyes was tearing a little bit, which I hadn't seen happen before. Feeling like a brand new adult with my new driver's license, I decided to take it upon myself to bring him to the vet and see what was up. So I put him into a brown paper grocery bag with his favorite blanket, made some air holes, stapled it shut, and strapped him into the passenger seat of my family's van. Fast forward maybe half an hour, and I'm sitting in the veterinarian's office holding Dusty, feeling like the most responsible adult ever. The vet is an exotic animals veterinarian and takes a look at him, then asks to do an x-ray. So she sedates him a little, does the x-ray, hands him back to me, and leaves the room. Adult level 9,000 as I sit petting him until he wakes back up. So vet comes back in and sits next to me on the little bench in the checkup room and starts petting him in my lap. She's telling me how wonderful he is and how lucky I am to have such a great little pet, asking me about my favorite memories of him, all this. So we are talking, and finally I ask her something like, "Okay, so how much do chinchilla eye drops cost? Because I've got to get going." And she smiles gently, saying something like, "I wish eye drops could fix this." She gives me a hug and starts to explain. Dusty was not bred responsibly and had some kind of internal deformity involving the roots of his teeth, putting pressure on his eyes and brain. This would eventually cause an early death. I couldn't believe it. I remember starting to cry and putting Dusty back in his grocery bag with his blanket and asking if the vet had a stapler I could use to close it again. I paid cash to the receptionist from my babysitting money and drove home, crying all the way. When I got home, I sat in the car for a while in the garage trying to gather myself as Dusty chewed on his bag. Looking back, I'm not really sure why, but in the car I decided not to tell my family the news. The vet said Dusty wasn't in pain despite his tearing eye and we wouldn't have to euthanize him. She didn't know how long exactly he had left, but guessed maybe a year. I guess I figured I didn't want my family to be sad every time they played with him or passed by his cage knowing his time was limited. I wanted the rest of his little life to be normal. Eventually, I brought him back into the house and put him in his cage. I went later that day to Petco and bought rodent eye drops as a cover-up and proudly told my family that night how I brought Dusty to the vet to check his eye and lied saying the doctor gave me eye drops and told me eye irritation is common in chinchillas. Dusty lived 3 more years after that, 2 years longer than the vet had expected. He passed away just shy of his 10th birthday. On the morning he passed, I told my dad what had actually happened at the vet. He told me I was so much more of an adult than I knew. Wow, that was an incredibly emotional journey. It's amazing how one moment can change the course of our lives forever. From the heartwarming story of Dusty and the lengths you went to protect your family from pain, we now shift gears to a completely different narrative. Next up, we have a post that delves into a much darker and more complex situation. This story is about choices made in the shadows and the heavy consequences that followed. It's a tale of regret, redemption, and the struggle to find meaning in life after making grave mistakes. Let's dive right in. Around 4 years ago, I was a vendor on the Darknet. It was a relatively short-lived thing. I was just doing it because I was too lazy to get a job, and at the time, didn't want to settle for the 9-to-5 thing. I wanted to start my own business and use the drug money as startup capital. I had been using myself for years. Along with that, I met lots of people into the dealing scene and eventually started dealing myself. I have a lot of anxiety though, so I hated meeting up with people in parking lots, and I definitely didn't want anyone to know where I lived. That's when I read about the Silk Road and Ross Ulbricht being caught. I became obsessed with the idea of it, became obsessed with learning operational security, OPSEC, all with the goal of eventually using my connections to start up my store. Well, after a couple of months I did. I started my store with 3 drugs, ketamine, meth, and some outdoor weed my buddy was getting for super cheap. All was going well for a few months, had a couple thousand get stolen in an exit scam, but I had about $25,000 saved at that point, so it didn't ruin my life like a few vendors I knew of. Eventually, I met a local connect that came into town only once a week, but had anything I wanted. Mescaline, LSD, mushrooms, PCP, even, and fentanyl. At the time, people weren't really cutting heroin with fentanyl. I mean, I'm sure people did plenty, but it was not nearly as commonplace now. People just did fentanyl, and still do. I put all my addresses into an Excel spreadsheet, along with their name, zip code, order, and the amount. At the time, I was selling some super white powdered mescaline. The fentanyl was also a white powder, very similar consistency. Long story short, my Excel messed up, or I messed up, and about 7 people's mescaline orders were filled in as fentanyl orders. They all went out. I didn't notice and kept doing my thing for a few days. After about 5 days, someone contacted me and told me their friend died from my mescaline. I immediately called bullshit and went to check my order log and scale up how much I had of my mescaline left. Well, I had about 11 grams more than I should have. I still don't know how the hell it could have happened. I wasn't a user, but I was definitely high off dabs. I went to check my order log on the marketplace to see if anyone had finalized their purchase, and a couple of them had, but none from a specific day, including the person that messaged me. No one that had purchased mescaline that day had finalized their orders. The market I was on also had a feature to see the user's last activity, and none of them had logged in for at least 3 days. Most were 2 days. I immediately deactivated my vendor account. I didn't even need confirmation. I knew what happened. I knew I just killed several people. I sold the rest of my drugs, converted my Bitcoin to cash, and moved away. Didn't speak to anyone for weeks. Found a job in a restaurant, living in a city I always wanted to live in. I haven't touched drugs since that day. I haven't had anything to do with that life since then. I still think about them every night. I saved their names and Googled them a few days later. I was able to find information on 4 customers that definitely died. One customer shared it with a friend. They both died. I don't know why I'm even posting this, mainly because I have no one to tell, and even if I did, I don't think I could. I spend my days sober, clocking into work, clocking out of work, coming home, playing video games. I'm a complete recluse. People I used to know have distanced themselves immensely, and I know it's because I'm a shell of my former self. I can't help it. Could I even tell a therapist about this? I don't feel like I deserve to be alive. Am I really living anyway? I don't even know anymore. Maybe this will help me feel better. Before I talk about today's posts, please consider subscribing for more heartfelt and engaging content. Wow, what an emotional roller coaster these Reddit posts have been. The first story about the albino chinchilla named Dusty really tugged at my heartstrings. It's incredible how much love and care this young person had for their pet, even going to such lengths to keep his family from knowing about his terminal illness. I can only imagine the strength it took to keep that secret and ensure Dusty's remaining days were filled with happiness. The second post is equally intense, but in a very different way. The story of being involved in the Darknet and unintentionally causing harm is both shocking and deeply saddening. It's a stark reminder of how our actions, even when driven by good intentions or misguided ambition, can have devastating consequences. This person's journey from a life on the edge to one of solitude and reflection is truly poignant. I'd love to hear your thoughts on these stories in the comments below. How do you think the author of the first post handled the situation? And for the second story, what advice would you give to someone dealing with such heavy guilt? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more thought-provoking content. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Voiced. If you enjoyed daily, high-quality stories, please like and subscribe to show your support.